How did a world memory champion, a theater director, a voice coach, a TV actor, and a professional magician all help one person win the world's best sommelier competition? How do top performers use nerves and adrenaline to their advantage? And what do high achievers do when they accomplish all the dreams they've been chasing for years? Good question. In today's episode, you'll hear the stories and tips that answer those questions in part 2 of our chat with Nina and Romané Basset, who have just published the commemorative edition of Tasting Victory, the life and wines of the world's favorite sommelier, Gerard Basset. You don't need to have listened to part 1 from last week first, but if you missed it, go back and have a listen after you finish this one. By the end of our conversation, you'll also discover how a brutally honest voice coach helped Gérard change the way he communicated, the hardest part of the Master of Wine journey, how reading The Economist magazine helped Gérard learn to think and argue in that style for the Master of Wine exam, and how Gérard evolved when old methods were no longer enough. Do you have a thirst to learn about wine? Do you love stories about wonderfully obsessive people, hauntingly beautiful places, and amusingly awkward social situations? Well, that's the blend here on the Unreserved Wine Talk podcast. I'm your host, Natalie McLean, and each week I share with you unfiltered conversations with celebrities in the wine world, as well as confessions from my own tipsy journey as I write my 3rd book on this subject. I'm so glad you're here. Now pass me that bottle, please, and let's get started. Welcome to episode 386. So what's new in the drinks world this week? Well, surprisingly, shockingly, there is only one animal-related story. A vineyard in northern Italy has not let us down. They have installed motion-triggered speakers that play classical music when wild boars approach the vines. The animals are either deterred or simply have different tastes in composers. There's far more news this week of the synthetic kind. In Verona, Italy, during the Vinitaly Trade Fair on April 15th, a robotic sommelier named Bacco1 successfully identified the vintage and vineyard of a Barolo in a blind tasting, though it accidentally drank the sample by venting it into its cooling fan. In California, a tech startup debuted Wine Sense glasses on April 17th, which use haptic feedback to vibrate against the drinker's lip if the wine is served even 0.5 degrees outside its optimal temperature range. Very fussy. A London cocktail bartender trained an algorithm on thousands of classic recipes and now serves drinks it invents on the spot, which is either the future of mixology or the beginning of a machine quietly judging your palate. A vineyard in Argentina hosted a night harvest lit up entirely by drones in the sky, creating a glowing canopy over the vines that looked like a gathering of thousands of fireflies. In her April 4th column for the Telegraph magazine, Victoria Moore unpacks one of the most controversial shakeups in the wine world right now, and it starts with a joke. When the character Basil Fawlty in the British TV comedy show Fawlty Towers from the 70s, played by John Cleese, sneers at a guest who couldn't tell a Bordeaux from a claret, the joke, of course, was really on him. Until recently, they meant the same thing. Victoria reports that the French regulatory bodies have now officially split them apart, designating claret as its own legal subcategory of red Bordeaux, starting with the 2025 vintage, in a move meant to stop steeply declining sales of Bordeaux. The original meaning of the term claret meant pale or clear, used to describe red wines that were lighter in color. The new style, described by Bordeaux Managing Director Stephanie Sinouquet, is fresh, fruit-forward, and approachable, and can carry up to 7 grams per liter of residual sugar, and is designed to be consumed chilled, targeting a younger, broader audience who might describe them, she says, as a smashable red. For British wine merchants who have spent decades building claret brands around tannic, dry, savory styles that most people associate with the word, this is a problem, Victoria quotes a British wine merchant about his best-selling own-label claret. Put a claret in the fridge, I think we're going to have to struggle to get customers to take it off the aga. Aga is the British term or brand of stove. In the weird but wonderful world of science, did you know that the foam on your beer, known as bereme, is actually a complex physical structure held together by LTP1 proteins? These proteins are hydrophobic, meaning they hate water, so they cling to air bubbles to escape the liquid, effectively creating a protective protein coat that preserves the beer's aroma while preventing the bubbles from popping too quickly. The compound most responsible for the banana note in many young wines and beers is isomyl acetate. And here's a twist. It's produced in higher amounts by yeast that's under stress. Stress the yeast just enough through temperature, sugar concentration, or fermentation speed, and it releases more of this ester as a kind of metabolic pressure valve. Wine that smells like banana candy is essentially documenting its own stressed-out situation. This is why freshly fermented Beaujolais Nouveau and some German Rieslings share that fruit candy character in youth. Cold temperatures, stressed yeast, isomyl acetate. The yeast panicked, and the result can be delicious or just downright weird. The distinct earthy smell of a damp wine cellar or certain aged spirits is often caused by geosmin, a compound produced by soil bacteria. Humans are evolutionarily hypersensitive to this scent, capable of detecting it at concentrations as low as 5 parts per trillion. To put that in perspective, you could detect a single teaspoon of geosmin diluted into 200 Olympic-sized swimming pools. And did you know that the diamond crystals sometimes found at the bottom of a cold bottle of white wine are actually potassium bitartrate? These crystals form when tartaric acid, a natural component of grapes, binds with potassium in cold temperatures. And while they look like shards of glass, they're completely harmless and are actually a sign that the wine was not heavily chemically stabilized. And finally, for your drinks calendar, April 22nd brings 2 celebrations worth stacking. Earth Day, which launched in 1970 and now draws more than 1 billion participants globally, making it one of the largest civic observances on the planet, is a natural excuse to open something from a producer committed to regenerative or organic farming, host a blind tasting of organic versus conventional wines to see if you can taste the difference, or build a cocktail from every leftover citrus peel in your fridge. It also happens to be National Jelly Bean Day, and that just makes me happy, honoring a confection that became a staple in U.S. military rations during the Civil War because its hard shell kept the centers fresh during transport. To mark both at once, try dropping a handful of spiced or pear-flavored jelly beans into a sparkling wine as a garnish, or use gourmet beans as the base for a guess the flavor cocktail game. Or even build a jelly rattler by combining your favorite wheat beer with whatever jelly bean flavor matches the season. April 23rd is National Picnic Day, which traces its origins to the French Revolution when royal parks were first opened to the public. Embrace that democratic spirit by packing a screwcap Riesling in a chilled tote, pre-batching a thermos of Negronis for the park, or simply eating outside with something good in your glass. It's also National Cherry Cheesecake Day, honoring a dessert with roots stretching back to ancient Greece, making it one of the oldest, still celebrated food traditions on Earth. Mark it with cherry cheesecake shots, a dessert and digestive pairing, or a competitive plating contest where everyone pretends they work at a Michelin-starred restaurant. April 24th is National Pigs in a Blanket Day, honoring the salty, buttery snack first popularized in the 1957 cookbook, Betty Crocker's Cooking for Boys and Girls. I can just imagine the cover of that. See Jane run. This is one of the greatest pairing tests of our time. The salty, fatty richness of the snack begs for a high-acid contrast. So girls and boys, make it the perfect moment to pop a sparkling wine as long as you're of drinking age, or build a mustard martini for mommy and daddy using savory-infused vodka and a tiny blanket-wrapped cocktail sausage on the rim. Oh, so cute. April 22nd delivers a double feature of the Snack and Grape. National Pretzel Day celebrates a snack that Pennsylvania Dutch immigrants brought to North America in the 18th century and it pairs beautifully with beer. So this is the day to dip salted pretzels into a stout-based chocolate fondue, rim a spicy bloody Caesar with crushed pretzel bits and celery salt, or simply open something malty and Bavarian. It's also International Viognier Day, celebrating one of the most extravagantly perfumed white grapes in existence, a variety so aromatic with peach, apricot, and violets that early botanists mistakenly classified it as related to Riesling. Viognier nearly vanished in the 20th century with fewer than 14 hectares remaining under vine at its low point. To celebrate, pour a Condrieu from France if you can find one, or mix a floral white wine spritz with a lavender syrup and a sliver of fresh peach, then wait for someone to ask if you added perfume. April 27th is National Prime Rib Day and National Marcelin Day, which is the most unexpected pairing of a steakhouse classic with a deeply obscure grape. National Prime Rib Day honors the cut traditionally called the King of Roasts, which calls for a big, bold red. Try a Syrah or a smoky, old-fashioned whiskey cocktail. And while the prime rib rests, raise a glass to World Marcelin Day, a crossbreed grape created in 1961 by French leaf scientist or ampelographer Paul Truel by crossing Cabernet Sauvignon with Grenache, giving it the structure of a cab and the fruit forwardness and smoothness of a Grenache in a single variety. Marcelin has become big in China, where it thrives in warm climates, but almost no one outside the wine trade recognizes its name. To celebrate, find a Languedoc example if you can. April 28th closes the week with National Blueberry Pie Day, honoring the official berry of Nova Scotia. Toast it by mixing a blueberry thyme shrub with a sparkling water and gin cocktail, sipping a chilled late harvest dessert wine, or simply putting a slice of blueberry pie next to the best off-dry Riesling you have and call it a day. Back to today's episode. 2 of you will win a copy of Nina and Romané's new book, Tasting Victory. If you'd like to win a copy, please email me and let me know you'd like to win. It doesn't matter where you live. I'll choose 2 winners randomly from those who contact me at natalie@nataliemaclean.com. Keep them for yourself or give them as gifts. If you're reading the paperback or ebook or listening to the audiobook of my memoir, Wine Witch on Fire, Rising from the Ashes of Divorce, Defamation, and Drinking Too Much, a national bestseller and one of Amazon's best books of the year, I'd love to hear from you at natalie@nataliemaclean.com. I'll put a link in the show notes to all retailers worldwide at nataliemaclean.com/386. Okay, on with the show. For the 2004 Athens competition, Gerard hired a world memory champion, Dominic O'Brien, who took him for a walk and taught him how to turn lists of sake terminology, the Japanese rice wine, into vivid, exaggerated personal stories involving motorbikes and mischief. And he worked with another memory champion, Jonathan Hancock. How did that work exactly? What were they doing for him? What were some of the specific techniques that they taught him that helped?
They came to the house quite regularly, actually, and Gerard found them really helpful. How it worked was that they broke down all of these very complicated, names of wines or regions of wines or lots of different grape varieties, and they gave Gerard a way of remembering them through association. For example, the Japanese wines, the idea of the motorbike was because obviously motorbikes have sometimes Japanese names like Kawasaki or something, and so they connected, let's have a story of you riding on a Kawasaki with a very attractive lady on the back of the bike, and you ride to, and then, they would create a story. And because it was a story, it was much easier to remember it in your head than if you were just learning by rote all of these different names of different types of sake.
That's true. Our brains are wired for stories.
Yes, exactly. So it was a much easier way. And of course, he would then tell that story to somebody over dinner because it was a funny story to retell. And that would help him to remember the names because everyone would talk about the story. So it was a very clever way of learning.
Yeah. Was there any other memory techniques that he picked up from them?
Probably, but I wasn't learning the memory techniques, so I can't remember them.
No worries. No, it reminds me of studying for exams, and you make acronyms of the 5 principles of whatever it is, chemistry or something.
Oh, actually, yes. No, you're right. So what he would do is he would draw maps every day, So he would study maps and then he would redraw them in all different colors. And he would write all of his notes, all of his study notes, he would write them longhand into all different folders. And then nearer the competition, he would take all of those notes and he would write them on little cue cards. He would summarize them and put them on cue cards. So for him, it was writing all the time, and condensing it down.
Yeah. So that one little piece of information can expand in your mind to a full essay answer or whatever. Yeah. No, that's great. Yeah. I love this. He was so dedicated. Now, Gerard had a voice coach in London who stopped him after 15 minutes of a presentation and said point blank, "My God, it sounds so boring. You speak in such a monotonous way. You are sending me to sleep." And he came back 2 weeks later and told him, "You have improved, not bad at all." What had he done to improve his voice quality?
So I remember he came back absolutely incensed, not that he'd been criticized, but the way he'd been criticized. It was in a very kind of brusque and quite harsh manner. The lady in question had sort of brushed him off and said, "It's rubbish, and you've sent me to sleep." And he came back really cross that he'd failed. Gerard didn't really enjoy failing and then not trying again. I mean, obviously he tried again 7 times to get his world championship. So he was determined that he was going to do better. So he said to her, "Okay, I'm going to come back." And she said, "Fine, but I'm not sure it's worth it." And anyway, so he practiced, every day he would stand in front of me and he would practice talking about, a scenario in a restaurant, or we would practice different aspects of service and so on. And I would say to him, "Well, I think you need a bit more of liveliness here or a bit more intonation there." And then he went back 2 weeks later and gave it his all. And because of the way the lady was, I think for her to say, "Well, it's quite good now," that was the biggest compliment that he was ever going to get from her. And so he came back elated that he'd done it.
That's great. Every aspect here covered. So for the Athens 2004 final competition, Gerard planned to suggest an 1896 Madeira linked to the first modern Olympics and to Greece's surprise Euro 2004 football victory over Portugal. The audience gave him a standing ovation. Then he writes that he relaxed too much, talked too long with guests during the decanting, and ran out of time for the wine correction. What does that story say about where he was most vulnerable?
What he learnt ultimately after that contest was you needed to use the adrenaline and the nerves that happen in a competition to your advantage, and never relax so much that you feel like you're at home in your own restaurant. I mean, obviously, when we train SOMs, we always say you need to feel at ease, think that you are in your own restaurant. But of course, in your own restaurant, you don't have a time limit. You don't have a time, clock ticking saying you've got 5 minutes to do a decantation. So I think it taught him a lot in terms of it's great to be relaxed. It's great to make your customers feel that you're in control while you're on the stage, but you mustn't let that adrenaline be lost. You have to use it to your advantage. And then by the time he got to Chile and the winning competition, in his mindset it was, what, I have nothing to lose. I've done this so many times. I'm going to do it this once final time more. If I win, it'll be amazing. I'm just going to step on that stage and enjoy it and enjoy every moment of it. And I think that was the sort of the turning point really for him, because I think he suddenly felt there was no pressure on his shoulders anymore. He decided he was going to have one more try. If it failed, then he'd have done his absolute utmost. And he had said he would retire. I don't believe that he would have. I think he would have carried on, because I can't imagine that he would have ever hung up his sommelier apron until he had won that title, because it was the one that eluded him for so long. But it showed on the stage. He stood on that stage in Chile and looked like he was enjoying himself. It didn't feel like he was competing. Well, it didn't feel like it for him. It felt like it for all of us.
Sure. Now, Gerard failed the theory section of the Master of Wine exam 4 times before passing it, which is not unusual. By the way, it has a notoriously low pass rate of about 10%. He had left school at age 16, wrote essays in a second language for this exam, and described spending hours studying The Economist magazine to understand how a well-constructed argument is built from beginning to end. He writes that the unofficial motto of the exam is investigate like a fine detective and argue like a brilliant barrister. What is the specific part of that journey that he found most humiliating, and how did he talk about that later?
I'm not sure humiliation, but certainly in terms of frustration. And I think probably it was the writing of the essays because, in terms of the tasting, he was doing tastings as a sommelier. In terms of the learning, he was learning for his other kind of life that wasn't exams, but his contest life. So the thing that eluded him was the essay writing because he didn't do that. In his day-to-day work, he didn't need to write an essay. In his exams, he might have needed to write an essay, but the style of writing essays was completely different from what the MW were wanting. So he took the expertise and the experience of somebody who was a writer, a very nice lady who came every week to the house and made him write essays. And she said to him, read The Economist, because the style of writing, the way that the MW wants you to write, The Economist is in a similar sort of style, and it will help you. And just keep practicing and practicing. And so, I don't think it certainly wasn't humiliation. It was frustration. And then, just again, this determination that he would crack it and he would learn to write essays well. And he did. He became a really proficient essay writer.
Wow, remarkable. Now, he won the Bollinger Medal for tasting excellence in his first attempt at the Master of Wine practical section, then recalls a conversation years earlier when the Bollinger CEO of the company had said it'd be wonderful if Gerard ever achieved both the qualification and the medal. These long game conversations clearly mattered deeply to him. Can you speak to the way Gerard set his ambitions? Was there always a horizon beyond the current horizon?
Yes, I think there was until after the 2010 contest. And in fact, that was something that concerned him because he'd always had a goal. He'd always had something that he was aiming for. So, whether it was to become a master sommelier, to become a master of wine, to gain his wine MBA, to do his OIV Master of Science qualification, to attain the ASI Best Sommelier of the World. There was always something that he was planning. Sometimes it would be 2 or 3 years ahead. Sometimes he would have to jump through various hoops to get to where he wanted to go, but there was always something. And then suddenly in 2010, he'd won the World Championship. And I remember him saying to me, "What do I do now? I haven't got any other goals." And I said to him, "I'm sure you'll find something." And he said, "Yes, but I can't, it's always been there. It's always been the obvious and logical next step. I don't have an obvious and logical next step now." So he threw himself into becoming very involved with the ASI, which is the International Sommelier Association. He became their technical director. Ultimately, later on, he became their sort of master of ceremonies for the competitions and so on. And he loved it. He was traveling around the world with sommeliers, immersed in the world of sommelier. But I think probably deep down, if he could have found another competition or another exam that he could have got his teeth into, he would have loved to.
He would have done it. Okay, so for that 2010 competition, Gerard assembled a team that included a business coach, 2 former protégés, his usual training group, and a PR consultant named Rebecca Williams, whose children attended the same school as you. Rebecca used Gulliver's Travels as a framework for encouraging Gerard to think differently about self-exposure and vulnerability. What did that mean exactly? How was she using Gulliver's Travels to help Gerard?
So I wasn't privy to their conversations because they were very they were one-to-one. It was actually me who'd suggested that he speak to Becky because up until 2010, he had been learning in the same sort of style. He had a formula that worked and it had stood him in good stead. But we realized that, from when he'd been competing the last time to 2010's competition, things had changed. He was older. He had to kind of up his game in some way. And so I said, maybe you need to speak to somebody.
How old was he at this point?
No, I can't remember how old he would have been in 2010. He would have been, late 40s, early 50s. Yeah. So I said to him, you need to take somebody who is not involved in the wine world, but who you trust enough and feel comfortable enough to work with, but somebody from outside who comes with a completely different perspective. And Becky will definitely make you think outside of the box. She's a very clever, very astute lady, and very gentle and calm in the way that she speaks to people. So I knew that that would work for Gerard. And they, obviously he knew her because the kids were at school together, but he really enjoyed having the sessions with her and trusted her judgment and trusted her expertise. And so they would go off and have these sessions over tea at Chewton Glen, actually, which is where Gerard used to work many years before. And they would discuss Gulliver's Travels, and he would come home and he'd say, I've got it. She's just turned a key in my head, and suddenly the door is opened and I see what I have to do. And he never explained what or how, but whatever it was, it worked because, he then went on to win the next time he competed. So he was very grateful to Becky.
Yeah. Now, Gerard gave Corinne Michaud the head sommelier position at the Hotel de Vin Birmingham when she was in her early 20s, barely speaking English herself, having arrived as a commis just the year earlier. He told her the news and she nearly fell off her chair. Can you tell us another specific story of him identifying something in someone that was not yet visible to them?
Yeah, I think probably every protege that Gerard has ever been involved with would tell you that they gained something from Gerard being able to unlock something within them that they didn't even know that they had, or that he empowered them, or so. Yeah, I think he just had this ability with people to find what it was that made them get excited about something, and if it was
Special,
wine,
yes,
great.
like Laura Reese. The ballerina.
Yes, Laura Reese, we called her the ballerina because she was always running around very elegantly, she was just a joy to watch in service because it was like watching a ballerina circling the floor. But
So it
it
was
might have been,
beyond technical accuracy.
yes, for sure. It was just something. And sometimes it wasn't even necessarily his somms, sometimes it would be one of the chefs. He would just see something in a chef and I think because he had time to talk to people, he would spend the time that was needed. There was never, it was never looking at his watch and saying, I've only got 5 minutes. He would sit and talk to people for as long as it took and give them the time that they needed to find whatever it was inside of them that made them flourish.
Now, his diagnosis of cancer of the esophagus came in October 2017, but he continued to write the book, continued to push on. What was it like? I don't know if you even can capture this into words, but that he finished writing it the day before he died. Do you think he was holding out to finish this thing, like the way he was so determined to win these competitions? Do you think, I've got a job to do and I'm not leaving before it's done?
Yeah, I think the book became something that was very important for him because when he was diagnosed, he said to me, I don't know how I'm going to cope with my life changing. I've been used to traveling a lot and suddenly I can't travel. I'm going to have to be at home. What am I going to do with myself? And I said, you should write a book. And he said, I've written a book. Even I used to say to him, if you're tired and you've got insomnia, read your book because it would send you to sleep. It wasn't that bad, but it was a very technical book. And so it was always a joke between us. I'd say, oh, I'm tired. Let me have your book. I'll read it and it'll make me go to sleep. So I said, but not that kind of book, not a technical book. You need to write a book about you, about your story, because people will want to read it. And he said, don't be ridiculous. Of course, nobody's going to want to read it. And I said, I think they will, because you have so much to give, so many inspiring stories to tell. And so I said, if nothing comes of it, just write it. But don't, because what he would do, he was a perfectionist. So normally he would write something, read it, rewrite it, read it again, rewrite it. And I said, you haven't got time to do that. You just need to get it all down. Just brain dump it onto the page. And I think he found that really useful. And he actually started to enjoy writing it. And so by the time he was actually, really very, very poorly, and he'd been in hospital for a lot of weeks, he he knew that he had another final sort of chapter to write. And as was his way, always, he didn't want to leave something unfinished. And he said to me, I need to finish my book. I can't do it here in the hospital. And he begged the doctors to allow him to come home. And the doctors said to us both, if he comes home, he won't be going anywhere other than, unfortunately, he will pass away at home. We can put a system in place to make sure that he's as comfortable as possible, but, we would prefer him to stay in hospital. We understand that he has this real need to go home. He wanted to be with his dog as well, he wanted to be with Malmsey. He loved her desperately. And so they let him come home, and they put an amazing structure in place to allow him to be home with nurses and so on. And he was home 7 days. And in those 7 days, he would write. But obviously, he couldn't write like he had been previously. He couldn't write for hours on end, but he was writing a little bit each day. And he was very proud that he'd been able to do that. And that kept him going, I think. And then when he'd finished the chapter, he'd finished what he had to say, literally, he laid his pen down and he said, I'm ready. I can go now. I've done it.
Wow. That's quite something.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So the foundation has a major fundraiser, the Golden Vines Auction, which has raised more than, or nearly 1.2 million pounds, I presume, at its first event in 2021. And the UK singing sensation Kylie Minogue performed and dedicated a song to Gerard. Wow. Ronan and Storm Keating have returned every year since. How did those relationships come about? How did they start participating in this?
So Kylie was actually, there was no previous relationship with Gerard other than he loved Kylie. He was a great fan of Kylie. He used to play all her songs always in the car and so on. And so it sort of felt fitting when we had the opportunity to ask her to be involved in the very first one. And she said yes. We were thrilled. And of course, when I went to thank her for being involved and I said, Gerard was a great fan. And she said, well, I think it's amazing what he managed to do in his life. And I think what you're doing is great. So I'm going to dedicate a song to him. And she did. And I was so overwhelmed with the emotion, I can't remember even what the song was because, it was just one of those moments you think, oh my gosh, So everyone says to me subsequently, what did she sing? And I'm like, I can't remember, but it was amazing, whatever it was. And then Ronan and Storm were actually at the first event, and Ronan actually stood up and very impromptu gave an auction prize. It wasn't planned, but he did. And then because it was such a popular prize, he actually gave it twice. So we raised double the amount of money. And then he said to us, I really want to continue to be involved. What can I do to help? And so subsequently, he and Storm have been presenters at the Golden Vines events subsequently. But there was a connection with Ronan before. He probably wouldn't remember. But when he was in his boy band, Boyzone, many, many years ago, they used to perform around the country, and they used to come and stay at Hotel Duvan in Bristol, which was one of our hotels at the time. And Gerard used to come home and say, Ronan was there today, or, the boys from Boyzone were there and they were nice boys. And so he never he never sat and had dinner with them, but obviously he'd sort of seen them and maybe said hello once or twice. But no, we're hugely grateful to Ronan and Storm that they are so generous with their time and that they are so involved with the Golden Vines. It's great.
That's fantastic. In Reflections, the chapter called Reflections, Gerard writes, quote, I was not blessed with the strength and skills of great athletes or sportsmen that I admired. I did not enjoy the stunning good looks of the likes of Paul Newman or Brad Pitt. Equally, I did not have the brilliant and sharp intellect of Garry Kasparov or Stephen Hawking. However, one feature I've been privileged to possess is rock-solid determination. Absolutely. I mean, that just clearly comes through, but I just had to share that line from the book. The epilogue closes with Gerard writing, I would do it all again. What do you think he means by all? Just going through his entire life as it unfolded from his childhood to the failed jobs to, of course, the glory and winning the competitions. Do you think that is what he meant?
Yeah, I think he did mean that. Even though, there were times when he had ups and downs like everybody, I think he would, because he would say that those failures, those many attempts at exam and competition success, all of that shaped him and made him. And he would say it made him a better person. It made him understand his failings and what he would have to do to start all over again. So, yes, I don't think he regretted a moment of anything. He would have, because if he hadn't have lived the life he lived, he wouldn't have been the man he was. So, I don't think he regretted anything that he'd done.
That's marvelous and true testament to his influence. More than 1,000 people came to his memorial at Winchester Cathedral. That is amazing. Now, in the Museum of Gerard Basset, which 3 objects do you think you would put in the central display, Nina?
Ooh, I think that's quite easy. Just before he died, he said to me, he had an office and no one was ever allowed in his office. In fact, you couldn't open the door to his office because it was so full of books. And he never used his office, but it was like a shrine to books. And he said to me, when you eventually go in my office and you have to clear it out, you'll be really cross, because in my desk you will find something or things and you'll be amazed. And I was thinking, gosh, what am I going to find? So when I did go eventually into his office to clear out his books, and I opened the drawers of his desk, there were probably more than 3,000 odd Laguiole corkscrews of all different types, different styles, different colors. All of the world champions of ASI had a Laguiole created for them, and he had hundreds of each of one of those. So I would definitely have to have a Laguiole corkscrew in that museum of Gerard Basset. I would definitely have to have wine books, because they were what, he just loved. He would collect wine books like other people would eat a hot dinner. He would buy the first edition, and then that would be the one that he would use to study. So because he was using that one, he would buy another one just to have on the shelf so it was pristine. And then, of course, if it was republished, he would have the second edition, the third edition, and so on. So he had hundreds of books, so it would have to be a book. And I think probably then also it would have to be photographs of his 2 beloved dogs and Romané, of course. So yeah, a trio of photos, the 2 dogs and Romy. Yeah, me too, maybe. Yeah. Yeah.
I hope so. And if you think Gerard could share a bottle of wine, if he were with us today, if he could share a bottle of wine with any person outside the wine world, living or dead, who do you think he'd share a bottle of wine with? And excluding family members.
Okay, so I think I can't exclude a very close friend. I will give you somebody from outside of the wine world, but in terms of a close family friend who really has been instrumental in his life subsequently to him passing away, more than he was while he was alive, although they were great friends while he was alive. And that's somebody called Lewis Chester, who has been the person who has created the Golden Vines, who has helped to ensure that we have the financial means to run the foundation. So without Lewis, none of what we do would really happen. He's a wine collector. He rang Gerard up one day and said to Gerard, I want to learn more about wine. I think you're the man to teach me. Will you do so? And they became firm friends. In fact, Lewis was the only person who came to the hospital to visit Gerard, because Gerard didn't want anybody else at the hospital. He didn't want to have his other friends there to visit, but Lewis was allowed to. And so I think he and Lewis, in fact, did drink a very special bottle of wine together, and both loved it, and it was a very special moment for them both. And so I think if they could recreate that again, they would. And it was a bottle of Le Pin 1996, and it's just one of those very special moments.
Famous Bordeaux, just for those who don't know. Yes.
So if I had to choose people from outside of the wine world, I think it would have to be Garry Kasparov. He mentions him in the book. Gerard was very keen on
chess player.
Yes, he was very keen on chess, and I think he would be fascinated to share a glass of something with Garry and explore his abilities as a chess professional and a chess champion. And probably, of course, I can't leave out a footballer, because Gerard loved football. So I suppose he would love to have the chance to sit down with somebody like Zidane and talk about football over a glass of something nice.
Forgive me, who is Zidane?
Zidane is a very famous French football player. He played in the World Cup, represented France, and he's an idol in French football. He's a legend. And yes, if they were going to be drinking something, Gerard loved all wines, but probably fortified wines, champagnes, and burgundies were some of his favorites. So I suppose he would have to have had something like that. So there would definitely have to be a Madeira in there somewhere. There would definitely probably have to be a sherry of some sort, probably a Fino on Rama. And then he would probably choose a very delicious, I don't know, a champagne, a Wiener, or Krug, Bollinger. I mean, it could be any one of them, but Henriot. I mean, he loved them all. So, yes, they would have fun, whatever they would choose to drink for sure.
That sounds wonderful. This has been terrific, Nina. Of course, the book, Tasting Victory, the commemorative edition, is now available. It's published by Academy de Vin Library, and it's available on their website and all the major book sites, Amazon, Chapters, Barnes & Noble, etc., Waterstones. Is there anything else you want to add as we wrap up that we've not covered?
No, I don't think so. I mean, thank you very much for having us on. Just to maybe one thing, people say, why did we write a commemorative edition? Why did we want to write additional chapters? Because hadn't Gerard covered everything himself? But I think it's really important that people understood that, yes, he wrote a book. Yes, he saw it completed to a point. And it was very much, he wanted it to be a legacy of what he hoped that he would be able to inspire people after he died, but we wanted it to be very much that it continued to inspire people. And I thought it was really important that people understood that he had no concept that we were going to create a foundation in his honor. We never talked about that. And so, to be able to add some extra chapters that talk about the foundation and talk about the fact that people are still 7 years on after his death, still talking about Gerard with the love and respect that they do, he would be so humbled by that and completely shocked that, people are still remembering him. And so I'm immensely grateful to Hermione Island and the Academy du Vin Library for allowing us and giving us the opportunity to republish the book. They weren't the original publishers, so for them to take it on and run with it and really believe in the book as they have done, for Romané and I, we feel truly appreciative of that. So thank you, Hermione and the Academy.
Yes, Hermione is a wonderful editor, person, publisher, all around.
She is
Yes.
for sure. Yes, yeah.
All right, Nina. Well, thank you again. I'm going to say goodbye for now. Thank you, and good luck with everything you're doing with the foundation and the book itself. It's a marvelous story of Gerard's life and the values that go beyond his life too. And you and your son Romané are perpetuating those. So congratulations.
Thanks very much, Natalie.
All right, cheers. Well, there you have it. I hope you enjoyed our chat with Nina and Romané. Here are my takeaways. Number 1, Gerard hired a world memory champion, a theatrical director from Paris, a voice coach, a TV actor, a professional magician, all to prepare for one single wine competition. As Nina says, they came into the house quite regularly, and Gerard found them really helpful. They broke down all of these complicated names of wines and regions and grape varieties and rules, and gave Gerard a way of remembering them through association and storytelling. So, for example, the Japanese wines, they attach to the idea or story of a motorbike, because sometimes these have names like Kawasaki, and then they built on that. You're riding this motorcycle. There's a lovely lady with you on the back, and you ride off in the sunset to where, etc. And this story was much easier to remember than if you were just trying to learn by rote all the different, say, names and types of sake. Number 2, how do top performers use nerves and adrenaline to their advantage? So in the Athens 2004 final competition, the audience gave Gérard a standing ovation, and then he writes in the book that he relaxed too much, then talked too long with guests during the decanting portion and ran out of time. As Nina adds, what he ultimately learned was that you needed to use adrenaline and nerves to your advantage and never relax so much as you feel like you're at home or even in your own restaurant. And although the sommeliers they trained need to feel at ease, but of course, in your own restaurant or any restaurant, you usually don't have such strict time limits as you do in competition. There's not a clock ticking, unless you've got one of those really pushy types. Nina says that really taught Gerard a lot in terms of making customers feel like you're in control while you're still on stage, while you're doing it with ease. And number 3, how do high achievers cope when they accomplish all the dreams they've been chasing for years? Nina says that it was after the 2010 contest where he won it, he was concerned because he had always had that goal for many years. And it was something he had been aiming for repeatedly. It took him 7 attempts to get it. As she said, he was always planning to achieve something, whether it was Master Sommelier, Master Wine, his MBA, his Master of Science qualification. But suddenly, he had it all. And she remembers him saying, now what do? I don't have any other goals. And that's something I think we all have to think of. Side note, I'm watching The Testaments on Hulu, which I think is owned by Disney. And it's based on the Margaret Atwood book. She wrote The Handmaid's Tales, and this is a spin-off. Anyway, love the show. All these young girls are going to a school for wives. They're going to be the wives of the commanders. And one of their big tests is for the aunts who are going to place them, be marriage makers, matchmakers. One of their big tests is serving a formal tea to the aunts and their own mothers or surrogate mothers. Anyway, it just reminded me so much of the service portion of the sommelier competition where everyone's watching you pour the wines or decant or whatever. And it just had so many resonances, except, of course, with the sommelier exam, you can be free and actually drink alcohol, whereas women can't in Gilead. Anyway, don't get me started, but I love the show. All right, if you missed episode 15, go back and take a listen. I chat with Leslie Brown with the Canadian Association of Professional Sommeliers about what to ask your sommelier when choosing wine from a restaurant list. I'll share a short clip with you now to whet your appetite.
This one always comes to the top of my 5 most embarrassing stories. And I was with a colleague, and we were fortunate enough to visit Graham's courthouse at the time. And the owner himself, Rupert Symington, was showing us around. And we had stepped into the old lagares where they hand stomped the grapes back in the day in order to extract the color and make an optimum part. And in these cement lagares, which are big troughs, they had these windows. So my colleague and I thought it would be really fun to take photos of each other through these little holes in the wall, until Rupert Symington informed us that's where the men would pee during their breaks on the foot stomping. So that quickly ended our giggling and fun, and we took things a little more seriously.
I guess they were well framed, those photos.
2 embarrassing stories right off the bat.
Excellent. You are one of us, Leslie. You won't want to miss next week when we chat with Michael Finnerty on pairing wine and cheese and the many colorful stories he has to share from his new book, The Cheese Cure. From stink questers, what are they, to celebrity encounters. And to give you a taste of future guests, we'll have Professor Mark Scarlatta on the intersection of wine and religion, Dr. Dave Nutt on wine and health, Ben Hawkins on port and sherry, global bartending champion Caitlin Stewart on fresh new cocktails for spring, humorist Maryse Chevrier on how to sound wine smart, Kara Newman on 40 cocktails to close out any evening, James Chatto on the iconic recipes and drinks that have shaped our taste, Liz Gabet on rosé, Christiane Westray on sake, and Dr. Charles Knowles on why we drink too much, and Marisol de la Fuente on the wines of Argentina. Do you have a question for any of our guests? Please let me know. Do you know someone who'd be interested in learning more about what it takes to become the world's best sommelier and what great restaurant wine service really is? Please let them know about the podcast. Email or text them now while you're thinking about it. It's easy to find the Unreserved Wine Talk podcast. Just tell them to search for that title or my name, Natalie MacLean Wine, on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, their favorite podcast app, or they can listen to the show on my website at nataliemaclean.com/podcast. Email me if you have a sip tip question or if you'd like to win one of 7 drink books I have to give away. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this episode or if you've read my book or are listening to it. Email me at natalie@nataliemaclean.com. In the show notes, you'll find a link to take a free online food and wine pairing class with me called the 5 Wine and Food Pairing Mistakes That Can Ruin Your Dinner and How to Fix Them Forever at nataliemaclean.com/class. And that's all in the show notes at nataliemaclean.com/386. Thank you for taking the time to join me here. I hope something great is in your glass this week. Perhaps a wine that reminds you of a memorable story. You don't want to miss one juicy episode of this podcast, especially the secret, full-bodied bonus episodes that I don't announce on social media. So, subscribe for free now at nataliemaclean.com/subscribe. Meet me here next week. Cheers.